Some ships retire quietly, and some get scrapped, and some get escorted to the scrapyard by 37 retired Terran mechanics who absolutely refuse to fill out paperwork. Old Men, Old Ship, Bad Combination by A.J. Moraine. Some ships earn retirement, and some ships get scrapped, and some ships get escorted to the scrapyard like fallen royalty nobody quite knows what to do with. The TCS Dominion was the third kind. She wasn't just steel and reactors. She was a headline, a scar across half the Dathari fleet registry, the kind of ship school children built models of and enemy admirals pretended not to remember. 15 wars, 2 border conflicts, 1 incident involving a moon that technically shifted position. If you asked the Confederation, she had reached end of strategic relevance. If you asked anyone who'd served on her, she'd just gotten politically inconvenient. Either way, she was on her final run, and the Terran Confederation, in its infinite wisdom, decided the best people to pilot a legendary battleship to her own dismantling were 37 retired mechanics with bad knees and worse attitudes, because nobody else knew her like they did.
I hope you enjoy this story. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Other stories can be found on my Patreon site, Sci-Fi Signal 360, A.J. Moraine. Also look for my ebooks. Thanks.
Caldwell stood on her bridge with a mug of coffee that had seen more reheats than the Dominion had seen refits. He was 68. Calm, gravel-voiced, the kind of man who didn't raise his tone even when something exploded. Behind him, the Dominion's bridge hummed low and steady. Old consoles, real switches. None of that modern touch panel nonsense that required you to ask permission from your own ship. She still smells like a warship, Briggs muttered over internal comm. That's 'cause she is one, Caldwell replied. The Dominion was massive, armor thick enough to insult physics, rail cannon housings still visible along her spine, though officially decommissioned. Safeties engaged, firing authority revoked, teeth capped but still very much present. She wasn't stripped yet. That would happen at the scrapyard. Today, she was being delivered, like a champion horse walking toward a glue factory. Trailing behind her on a tow line was something much less impressive. A small frigate. Old, rust-caked, painted in at least 4 different colors, none of them original. One panel still bore a faded advertisement for something that might have been fertilizer or plasma coolant. She looked like a junkyard argument that had lost. Her name, technically, was the Sable Finch. Nobody called her that. They called her that thing, because from a distance, that was all she was, a thing. You would never guess that over the last 8 years, every time the retirement crew logged weapons at the scrapyard, something occasionally got misfiled. Not stole, misfiled. A point defense cluster here, a refitted engine core there, a mass driver assembly that had accidentally found new purpose, all perfectly legal on paper. Eventually, the Finch had refitted engines that hummed too smooth for something that ugly, shield generators that didn't match her hull, weapon ports welded into seams you wouldn't notice unless you knew what to look for, which most people didn't. That was the point. Ellis leaned over his console on the Dominion's bridge. Contact. Caldwell didn't look up yet. Define. Dathari cruiser. Closing slow. That earned his eyes. Those assholes. On the forward display, the cruiser slid into view. Modern, sharp, sleek. The kind of ship that had never had to borrow parts from a scrapyard. The Dthari had lost badly to the Dominion 3 years ago. Very public. Very embarrassingly. The Dominion had been central to that battle. She'd broken their line and made a flagship fold in half. Dathari memory was long. Humiliation was longer. They're lining up pretty, Ellis said. Behind them, Briggs' voice drifted up from engineering. Bet they want the hull. Caldwell nodded once. The Dominion wasn't just scrapped to the Dathari. She was a trophy waiting to happen, and if they could seize her, strip her, parade the carcass, erase the symbol, that would heal something in their pride. The small rusted frigate behind her? Nobody cared about that. It barely looked space-worthy. Maintain course, Caldwell said calmly. Tow stable, Ellis replied. The comm chimed. Commander Varel appeared on screen looking polished and irritated at the same time. "You are operating a war vessel in contested proximity," he announced. "Power down and prepare to be boarded." Caldwell blinked slowly. "We are transporting decommissioned property," he replied evenly. "Under contract." "You are transporting a war relic." "So that's correct. You will submit to inspection." Behind Caldwell, one of the retirees snorted softly. Inspection? That was rich. Caldwell set his coffee down. "Or not," he challenged. "Now I've seen young captains make mistakes before. They tend to look at the biggest thing in the room. In this case, that was the Dominion. 300 meters of legendary Terran steel drifting, steady and heavy, toward the scrapyard. The Dathari cruiser edged closer, docking spines beginning to extend. They never once scanned the rusted frigate behind her with anything resembling concern. Caldwell watched the tactical overlay. "Briggs." "Yes." "Are we retired?" There was a pause. "For the moment," Briggs replied. On the forward display, the Dathari cruiser surged forward to latch onto the Dominion's hull, and behind the legend, the ugly little frigate adjusted her engines, just slightly, and nobody noticed. That's usually how bad combinations begin. Now, I don't know who trains Dathari officers, but if I had to guess, I'd say it involves mirrors, because that cruiser coming in looked real proud of itself. All polished hull lines and neat little weapon seams, every edge sharp enough to cut pride. You could tell it had never once been patched with salvaged platen or welded by the man who just finished a sandwich. It was what young admirals call modern. The Dominion, by contrast, looked like history that hadn't forgiven anybody. The Dathari cruiser closed to board and range, docking spines unfolding like someone trying to hug a bear with knives strapped to their arms. "Boarding geometry confirmed," Ellis said. Caldwell didn't raise his voice. "Let's not make sudden movements. I don't need the paperwork." Behind them, Briggs muttered, "Sudden movements are for knees under 40. The Dathari commander appeared again, this time looking pleased with himself. "You will power down," Varel announced. "Your vessel is subject to seizure under Dathari War Reparations Statute." Now that right there is the kind of sentence that sounds impressive until you say it out loud to a Terran. "Reparations," Briggs echoed over internal comm. "Well, ain't you special? Did you just make that up?" Caldwell folded his hands behind his back. "This vessel is under Confederation contract," he replied calmly. "We are delivering her to scrap." "You are delivering a warship that humiliated the collective," Varel snapped. "We will take possession." "Way I hear it, you humiliated yourselves." Behind the Dominion, the small rusted frigate hummed quietly. Nobody looked at her. Not even the Dathari scanners gave her more than a passing sweep. Old paint, mismatched plating, engines that sounded slightly too smooth if you were listening closely, but nobody was listening. They were staring at the legend. The Dathari cruiser surged forward, docking spines extended at speed, aiming for the Dominion's hull like they were latching onto a museum exhibit. Ellis glanced sideways. "Collision mitigation active." Now here's something about old Terran battleships. They were built back when safety systems were allowed to overreact. The Dominion's automated debris response system had not been updated in decades. It still believed in decisive action. The Dathari docking arms crossed into the Dominion's safety envelope. The Dominion responded. Point defense clusters erupted along her hull in a roar of kinetic protest. Not weapons. Safety rapid-fire cannons shredded the incoming docking spines into expensive confetti before they ever touched armor. On the forward display, bits of Dathari hardware spun away in neat little clouds. Silence on the bridge, then Briggs said, "Well, that's unfortunate." The Dathari commander reappeared, expression somewhere between shock and insult. "You fired upon us." "Our debris mitigation system engaged," Caldwell replied evenly. "Your equipment approached at unsafe velocity. You destroyed our boarding array." "Appears so." The Dathari cruiser pulled back a few kilometers, clearly recalculating how to insult a ship that had just shredded its boarding arms using safety. "Power spike," Ellis said. On the tactical display, the Dathari cruiser's forward emitters began to glow. That was no docking maneuver. That was pride. "They're charging weapons," Ellis confirmed. Caldwell nodded once. Well, that seems excessive. The first plasma volley struck the Dominion's forward armor with a flash bright enough to wash the bridge in white. The ship shuddered, deep, heavy, like she'd just been kicked and was deciding whether to kick back. Structural integrity dipped 3%, then stabilized. On the engineering deck, Briggs leaned against a bulkhead and waited for the vibration to settle. "That all you got?" he muttered. Second volley hit closer to propulsion. Our armor flared and deck plating rattled. One overhead panel sparked briefly, then decided it had better things to do. "Drive efficiency down 2%, Ellis reported. "Still prettier than them," Briggs said, and the Dathari cruiser kept firing, walking their shots across the Dominion's hull like they were trying to carve their name into history. "Captain," Ellis said quietly, "they are focusing entirely on us." Caldwell glanced at the tactical display. "Of course they are." The Dthari were doing what young captains always do. They were staring at the biggest problem in the room. The Dominion absorbed another volley. Armor scorched, but she held. She'd been hit harder, by worse ships with better aim. Behind her, the little frigate adjusted position again. 2 degrees, then 3. No one on the Dathari cruiser paid attention. Why would they? It looked like scrap. "Captain," Briggs said slowly over comm, "the Finch is clear tow." Caldwell allowed himself the faintest nod. "Understood." The Dathari cruiser charged a heavier shot now. Something with ambition. "Impact window 4 seconds, Ellis said. Caldwell looked at the forward display, then at the quiet little frigate drifting behind them. "Well," he said mildly, "this is where they learn." The Dathari fired, and the Finch, ugly and ignored, finally stopped pretending to be harmless. The Dathari heavy shot hit the Dominion hard enough to rattle dust out of compartments that hadn't seen light since the Krellon War. Deck plates groaned. Somewhere deep in the hull, a pipe objected loudly and then reconsidered. "Structural integrity down 5%, Ellis said, and Caldwell didn't blink. "She's taken worse." The Dathari cruiser charged again. They were committed now. Big shots. No finesse. Pride was driving the gunnery. Behind the Dominion, the Finch's engines flared, not dramatically, just enough to cancel drift. Then she did something that made Briggs start laughing. "Captain," Briggs said, trying to stay professional, "you're not going to like this." "What?" "The Finch just armed the scrapyard inventory." There was a pause. Caldwell turned slightly. "Define inventory." "You remember those 6 pallets of decommissioned proximity mines?" Caldwell closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." "They're live." On the tactical display, small objects began launching from the Finch's cargo bay. Not sleek missiles, not cinematic torpedoes. They were irregular shapes, scuffed, different sizes. Half of them still had faded serial numbers. The Dathari cruiser didn't even register them at first. They were too small, too random, too, junk. Then the first one detonated, not against the hull, in front of it. A proximity burst flared in the cruiser's path, forcing their forward shields to spike. Then another, then another. A growing field of detonations began forming directly between the cruiser and the Dominion. "Are those—" Ellis leaned forward. "Misfiled," Briggs confirmed. The Dathari tried to push through. Their shields flared violently as proximity mines detonated one after another, walking across their forward arc in a messy, unpredictable chain. This wasn't precision, it was harassment. "Captain," Ellis said, trying not to grin, "looks like we've created debris." The Dathari cruiser pulled back sharply, shields flickering under the cascading detonations. On screen, Commander Vorel reappeared, furious. "You are deploying illegal munitions." Caldwell's voice stayed calm. "We're experiencing a cargo shift." Behind the minefield, the Finch accelerated. She didn't fire mass drivers. She didn't light up dramatically. She simply drove straight through the chaos she had created. Her shields held. The Dathari cruiser's targeting did not. The Finch slid along the cruiser's port flank at close range. Then something new happened. Not a mass driver. Not a mine. The Finch's refitted engines surged to full burn. "Briggs," Caldwell said quietly. "Yes." "She's not—" "Oh, she is." The Finch rammed. Not hard enough to destroy, hard enough to humiliate. "That's going to leave a mark," Caldwell commented. Her reinforced bow slammed into the Dathari cruiser's exposed weapons array, crushing emitters and folding plating inward like someone had kicked a soda can. The impact wasn't elegant, it wasn't pretty, it was deeply personal. On the Dominion's bridge, silence. Then Ellis said softly, "She just headbutted a cruiser." Caldwell replied. The Dthari cruiser's forward batteries died instantly. Their hull buckled along the impact seam. The Finch bounced off, rotated, and fired a short-range burst from point defense clusters directly into the damaged section. Nothing catastrophic, just decisive. The Dthari cruiser's main power grid flickered, then dropped dead in space. No dramatic explosion, no cinematic collapse, and just modern pride sitting still and smoking. The Finch drifted back into position beside the Dominion, ugly engine humming steady. Briggs exhaled slowly. "Well, hey," he said, "that ought to be on the insurance form." Caldwell picked up his coffee again. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. On screen, the Dathari commander looked less like a conqueror and more like a man who had just been tackled by farm equipment. "You rammed us." "Yes," Caldwell said calmly. "That appears to have occurred." The Dominion resumed her slow, steady course toward the scrapyard. The Dathari cruiser drifted behind them, systems offline. Ellis leaned back. "Captain?" "Yeah. I think we just won a war memorial with a battering ram." Caldwell stared out at the stars. "They fired first," he said, and the Finch, bless her ugly heart, purred like she'd finally gotten to stretch her legs, and now the crew could have powered up the Dominion and fought the Dathari cruiser proper. They absolutely could have. The rails were still there. The reactor still had depth. The armor still had attitude. One authorization override, and that old warship would have reminded everyone why she had a reputation. But the paperwork would have been unbearable. The Dthari would claim the Terrans staged the whole thing, sent the Dominion as bait, provoked a confrontation, escalated a border incident. There would be hearings, committees, weeks, maybe months of testimony. Caldwell hated paperwork, and they had another haul scheduled next week, and so, no, the Dominion would remain retired, officially. Behind them, the Dthari cruiser drifted, damaged, embarrassed, and very aware that no one in their command structure could ever hear the phrase, "defeated by scrap tug," which meant they were about to try something stupid. "Power spike," Ellis said. Caldwell didn't sigh, but it was close. On the tactical display, the Dthari cruiser's forward spine began to glow. Not scattered emitters, not flailing, their main weapon. "You're kidding," Briggs muttered. "They're charging a spinal accelerator," Ellis confirmed, partial grids back online. Now that right there is pride making decisions. The Dathari commander appeared again, looking less polished and more desperate. "You have committed aggression against a Dathari warship. You will be destroyed." Caldwell nodded slightly. "I recommend reconsidering." The weapon charge intensified. The Dathari cruiser rotated slowly, aligning the massive firing port directly toward the Dominion. They weren't even aiming at the Finch. They wanted the legend. They wanted the symbol. They wanted something big enough to make the report read better. "Impact window 8 seconds if they fire," Ellis said. Caldwell glanced once at the Finch. "Briggs?" "Yes." "Are we still avoiding paperwork?" "For as long as humanly possible." Caldwell looked forward again. "All righty then. Now here's something about old Terran battleships. They were built with certain redundancies. One of those redundancies involved mass displacement rails, originally intended for clearing orbital debris during fleet maneuvers. They weren't technically weapons, they were safety equipment. The Dthari spinal weapon reached full charge. Energy pooled in the firing chamber, bright and violent and confident. 5 seconds, Ellis said. The Dominion's forward hull shifted almost imperceptibly. Deep inside her armored spine, something very old and very heavy aligned. 3 seconds. The Dthari cruiser committed. The firing port flared, and just before the weapon discharged, the Dominion's debris clearing rail launched a solid titanium rod at obscene velocity. It didn't glow. It didn't roar. It just existed very quickly. The rod entered the Dthari firing port precisely at the moment of maximum charge. There was a pause. a half-second of physics, reconsidering its life choices. Then the Dathari cruiser's forward section erupted inward. Not a cinematic explosion, a contained furious implosion as their own weapon system detonated inside its housing. The shockwave rippled along their hull. External platen buckled. Power cascaded offline. On the Dominion's bridge, silence. Ellis blinked once. Well, behind them, the Finch's engines idled calmly. The Dathari cruiser's forward third was now structurally discouraged. Their spinal mount was gone, and their pride was vapor. Their propulsion flickered twice, then failed entirely, dead in space again. Commander Vorel appeared on screen, looking like a man who had just swallowed a star. You fired upon us. Our debris mitigation system responded to unsafe weapon discharge, Caldwell replied evenly. You deliberately targeted. You were about to fire in a trade lane. There was no answer to that, because it was true. Briggs's voice drifted up from engineer end. Well, Ingenuo, he said. That's going to require a footnote. Caldwell nodded. Yes. The Dthari cruiser vented atmosphere in small, embarrassed bursts. No jump drive, no main weapon, no dignity. And here was the part that truly hurt them. There would be no version of events in which they admitted the Finch had crippled them. Because the final blow, that came from the Dominion, the war hero, the ship they tried to seize, and if they reported it honestly, they would have to explain how a retired legend, Undertow, still had enough bite to ruin their newest cruiser. If they lied, they'd have to explain how their spinal weapon detonated itself. Either way, someone was losing rank. Caldwell picked up his cold coffee again. Transmit their coordinates to Confederation Patrol, he said. With what note? Ellis asked. Caldwell considered it. Tell him a Dathari cruiser appears to have suffered a tragic interaction with its own enthusiasm. Ellis's mouth twitched. The Dominion resumed her slow, steady path toward the scrapyard. The Finch fell back into tow position like nothing had happened. Behind them, a modern Dathari cruiser drifted in silence. Briggs cleared his throat. Captain? Yes. Does that count as returning fire? Caldwell stared forward. No, he said calmly. That counts as preventing paperwork. And somewhere in a Dathari command chamber, someone was going to have to explain how their newest cruiser had lost an argument with a retirement detail and a ship on her way to be dismantled. Now that's a bad combination. Confederation Patrol arrived 20 minutes later, 2 destroyers and 1 cruiser. Very serious and very official. They dropped out of FTL, scanned the area, and immediately locked onto the drifting Dathari wreck. Then they noticed the Dominion. Then they noticed the Finch. Then they noticed the scorch marks. Transfer vessel Dominion, the patrol commander hailed. Report incident. Caldwell leaned toward the comm. We were en route to scrapyard delivery, he said calmly. Encountered debris. There was a pause. Debris, the patrol commander repeated. Yes. Behind Caldwell, Briggs muttered, very enthusiastic, debris. The patrol commander switched channels. The Dathari cruiser was venting atmosphere in dignified little puffs. Their main weapon was now an interior decorative feature. The patrol commander came back on. It appears the Dathari vessel attempted weapons discharge in trade lanes. That would explain it, Caldwell replied. You did not return fire? No, Caldwell said. We prevented damage. Long silence. The patrol commander knew exactly what that meant. He also knew what would happen if this escalated into hearings. Understood, the patrol commander said carefully. We will tow the Dathari vessel for review. Much appreciated. The Dominion resumed course. The Finch tucked neatly back into tow position, looking exactly as ugly as she had before. Behind them, a very modern Dathari cruiser was about to be dragged home by Terran authorities like a teenager caught street racing. Ellis leaned back in his chair. Captain? Yes. Do you suppose they'll try again? Caldwell stared out at the stars ahead. They won't report this, he said. Why not? Because there is no version of the story where they admit what happened. Briggs chimed in over comm. And if they do, he added, we'll be retired. Caldwell allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. We are retired. The Dominion moved steady and heavy toward the scrapyard. a legend on her last ride. The Finch rattled quietly behind her. Ugly, underestimated, absolutely not furniture. She was about to get a new railgun. Some ships go out with fireworks. Some go out with honor. And some go out reminding the galaxy that old steel doesn't forget how to bite. The Dominion would be dismantled in a month. The Finch, she had another haul scheduled next Tuesday, and somewhere in Dathari space, someone was going to spend the rest of their career explaining how a brand new cruiser lost a fight to a ship that was technically on her way to die. That's the kind of thing that sticks, especially when paperwork's involved.